Good afternoon. What happens now to the Prime Minister's big plan to fix the small boats crisis? This morning, the Court of Appeal ruled the government's plan to deport migrants who come here illegally to Rwanda is unlawful. The charity which brought the legal challenge, along with several asylum seekers, says today's ruling is a vindication of fairness. Labour says it shows one of Rishi Sunak's 5 key pledges to the country is unravelling. In the last hour, the Prime Minister says he respects the court's decision, but fundamentally disagrees with it. Here's Chloe Keedy.
The government has made stopping small boats one of its biggest priorities. It says the way to deter people from making this dangerous and desperate journey is to deport them to Rwanda to make their asylum claims. But that plan was ruled unlawful by 3 judges at the Court of Appeal this morning, who overturned a High Court judgment that Rwanda could be considered safe.
The deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country.
This is the latest step in a long-running legal battle that has become something of a personal crusade for the Home Secretary.
Fly a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream. That's my dream. It's
when
my
will
obsession.
that happen?
We haven't seen the Home Secretary today, but her colleague Penny Mordaunt was asked for her reaction in the Commons.
This is clearly a matter for the Home Office to update the House on. We respect the court's decision, and I think there will be a statement later today from the Home Secretary.
Since signing the agreement with Rwanda last April, the closest the government has come to sending anyone there was last June, when this plane carrying asylum seekers sat on the tarmac for hours before the flight was eventually cancelled after an intervention from the European Court.
Rwanda plan is good to go.
In December, campaigners and asylum seekers lost their High Court challenge against the government. One of the charities that brought that challenge described today's ruling as a vindication.
We're absolutely delighted that the Court of Appeal has upheld the argument that Rwanda is not a safe country for people seeking asylum and that people will not be sent to Rwanda.
But in a statement today, Rwanda hit back, insisting Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world and we have been recognised by the UNHCR and other international institutions for our exemplary treatment of refugees. Rwanda remains fully committed to making this partnership work. And if the UK government still feels the same, then its next step will be to launch an appeal. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
I'm joined now by our UK editor, Paul Brand. Where does this leave the government's big policy then?
Well, Nina, today's court battle was never just about the law, it was also about the next election, because the government, of course, has made deterring channel crossings one of its 5 main pledges. And the Court of Appeal has essentially ruled today that that promise, as it currently stands in this form of the Rwanda policy, cannot lawfully be kept. So for the government, this is a huge disappointment. Statements today come out from both the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister in the last hour or so. The Prime Minister, for example, says, while I respect the court, I fundamentally disagree with their conclusions. Rwanda is a safe country. We will now seek permission to appeal this decision. That appeal, I think, does have some chance to it, because today's decision wasn't unanimous. It was a majority of judges, but not all of them thought that this policy was unlawful. So the government will hope now there's a sort of a chink of hope there for them at the Supreme Court, but that's going to take months and months and months to run its course. So it's very unlikely that many planes, if any, will have taken off before the next election to allow it to stick to that pledge that it's made. And if it loses that next battle in the Supreme Court, well, the nuclear option here, as some have described it, is for the government to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the area of law that scuppered them in this court case. There are Conservative backbenchers already calling this afternoon for the government to crack on and pull us out of the ECHR. That is a framework that Winston Churchill was Prime Minister when it was first enforced. He was in power when that first became a reality for the United Kingdom. He was a proud signatory of the ECHR. He surely could never have foreseen that his own party would be proposing to take us out of it.
Paul Brand, thank you very much. Thank you. After Boris Johnson was found to have lied to Parliament over Westminster parties during lockdown, today the same senior committee slammed some of his main supporters. The Privileges Committee, in a new report, have accused the former ministers Nadine Dorries and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg of interfering with its investigation. They could be suspended from the Commons. Dame Priti Patel and Lord Zach Goldsmith were also criticised. With the details, here's our political reporter, Amy Lewis.
Boris Johnson will be found guilty by this kangaroo court.
The lack of accountability. I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
The Privileges Committee is not even a proper legal setup. It is, in fact, a political committee against Boris Johnson.
A committee of MPs has described these as disturbing examples of a coordinated campaign to interfere with a parliamentary inquiry.
It should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Allies of Boris Johnson have been accused of publicly attacking the integrity of the Privileges Committee, which triggered his resignation as an MP after he was found to have misled Parliament with his denials about parties during lockdowns. In a special report, the panel has said this unprecedented and coordinated pressure did not affect the conduct or outcome of our inquiry. However, it had significant personal impact on individual members and raised significant security concerns. Jacob Rees-Mogg, the most high-profile MP named in the report, was more focused on cricket today than the criticism.
And then I shall be at the Test match, which I'm looking forward to. Thank you so much.
Next month, MPs will decide what action, if any, is taken.
The fact that a debate on it is on the business statement, I hope reassures the House how seriously government takes these matters.
5 of the 8 politicians named in today's report were recommended to receive honours by Boris Johnson in his resignation list. Another of Boris's backers named in the report has been defending his actions.
I am disappointed to be named, and I think it's a bit of a sad day for free speech if I'm unable to criticise a media witch hunt for fear of being named in a Privileges Committee report.
Lord Goldsmith, the only serving minister to be named in the report, was absent from the House of Lords today amid uncertainty about his future in government.
Rishi Sunak's the Prime Minister now. He served Boris Johnson. He propped him up through all those lies. It's about time he showed that he understands that being a Member of Parliament should be honourable, that we are bound by a code of conduct, that we are bound by the Nolan Principles on public life, which includes honesty.
Many would regard it a privilege to be a politician, but today some members and ministers have been accused of attacking the legitimacy of Parliament itself. Amy Lewis, ITV News, Westminster.
Let's get more now from our political editor, Robert Peston, who's in Westminster. How likely is it that any of the politicians named will be punished?
Quite likely, I would say. It's a slightly complicated process. What will happen next month is that the House of Commons will debate a motion that would give the Privileges Committee itself, this is this sort of de facto court for the House of Commons, the powers to punish any MP that, in the view of, as I say, this de facto court, the Privileges Committee, puts undue pressure on the members. And what this is all about, as you've just heard from Amy, is that the members of that committee, particularly the Tory members, felt that they were effectively being bullied by MPs who were accusing them of not following due process, of being on a witch hunt, of having a kangaroo court, of being out to get Boris Johnson. And because, particularly among members of the Tory party, this whole process was very controversial. But Boris Johnson, don't forget, has passionate supporters among Tory members. These members of the committee felt that excessive pressure was being put on them. In effect, there was a sort of coded threat that maybe, members of the Tory party would throw out these Tory MPs. And indeed, you'll also have heard that some of them felt in danger, that in some way the critics like Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg were doing was sort of whipping up so much emotion that these MPs didn't feel safe. But the Privileges Committee, does, as we've seen, have tremendous powers to punish somebody like Boris Johnson, who they say lied to Parliament. They don't have powers to punish people who've criticised them. This is MPs who've criticised the court outside of Parliament. So they're saying, give us those powers. They're saying there are precedents for being given those powers when it comes to another kind of court, which is called the Standards Committee. The House of Commons will give them those powers, right? I'm absolutely certain that vote will go through. But then there is the separate question of whether these then individuals will face a separate punishment. And I think they will, because what I expect is an amendment to go down to that motion, which will call on those MPs to apologise formally for their behaviour in the House of Commons. I think it is quite likely that some of those MPs will refuse to apologise, because as we've heard just now, they think they've done nothing wrong. If they refuse to apologise, then at that point, they could face the same kind of punishment that Boris Johnson faced. They could be suspended.
All right. Robert Peston, thank you very much. Thank you. France is deploying 40,000 police officers overnight tonight in a bid to stop the violent protests seen since a teenager was shot dead by traffic police in Paris. 180 people were arrested last night in the second night of unrest, and 170 officers were injured in the clashes. The violence was sparked by the killing of a 17-year-old in the Parisian suburb of Nanterre. His mother has called for a silent protest today to remember him. The French president has called for peace during an emergency summit. Our Europe editor James Mates is in Nanterre and just sent this.
We're at the head of a demonstration of several thousand people now marching from where Nahel lived up to the prefecture, the town hall, where they are demanding justice for Nahel. Now, Nahel's mother has asked for this to be quiet and respectful and peaceful, and so far it is. But of course there are elements here who are seething with anger, and there are many police waiting for this demonstration to arrive, and that's where flashpoints may occur. Last night, 150 arrests, 80 or more police officers injured in demonstrations really right across France. The country's interior minister has promised 40,000 police on the streets tonight. Whether that will be sufficient to control it, we will have to see. In terms of justice, we have been told that the policeman who fired the fatal shot is being charged with murder, that there was no legal justification for the discharge of his firearm, and he is being kept in detention. Whether any of that satisfy these people is unlikely, because what you have here is a much bigger problem of police violence and police brutality that they're protesting against.
James Mates in Paris there. Still to come this lunchtime, the royal finances, where the family's been spending its cash. Plus, the Queen of Pop's recovery from intensive care. Before that, a secret Metropolitan Police squad that spied on people wasn't justified and should have been closed down. Those are the first conclusions of a mammoth inquiry into a unit of undercover officers that operated from 1968. Campaigners say the initial findings today are devastating for the police, the security services and the government. The inquiry is looking into what's been called the spy cops scandal, examining accusations that undercover officers deceived women into long-term sexual relationships, that the identities of dead children were used without their families' consent. And the undercover officers collected a striking and extensive amount of personal information, including sexuality. Our correspondent John Ray is at Scotland Yard. John, another scandal at the feet of the Met.
Yeah, that's right, Nina. This report has been a long time coming, 8 years so far, more than 1 million secret documents from the vaults of the Metropolitan Police. Many, many witnesses have given evidence, and still we only have the years 1968 to 1982 that have been covered, though, as you say, what we have so far, the conclusions are damning. And what this report is saying is that despite years of deceit and subterfuge, the results of this unit were very modest. No major plots to bring down the government were ever uncovered, and that the intrusion into many hundreds of lives just wasn't justified. The report says the ends did not justify the means, and that this unit, known as the Special Demonstration Squad, should have been disbanded. Of course it wasn't, and it went on in the 1990s, for example, to spy on the family of Stephen Lawrence, and it continued, or officers continued to dupe women into sexual relations, like this woman, an environmental campaigner who I spoke to outside the inquiry a short while ago.
I never gave informed consent to have sex with an undercover officer, and my feelings towards the police at the time, he knew that I would never have consented. He would never have got in through the front door, let alone actually into my bed, had I known who he was, and he knew this.
So this has brought this afternoon another abject apology from the Metropolitan Police, and they're saying, look, be reassured, the whole regulatory framework has changed since the bad old days. But of course we live in the days of Extinction Rebellion and many other campaigns. So these questions are still live ones. We're going to have to wait till 2026 to get the final recommendations of this inquiry.
John Ray, thank you. Next, after a year that's seen events from the Platinum Jubilee to the Queen's funeral, it is perhaps no surprise to hear that the royal household has blamed what it calls an exceptional period of transition on the rising costs to run the royal family. Official figures show that spending by the monarchy rose from just over £102 million to more than £107 million in the last year, a rise of more than 5%. But with their income from the sovereign grant remaining at £86 million, the royals have had to use over £20 million from their reserves to close the gap. I'm joined now by our royal editor, Chris Shipp. Take us through the figures, the details.
Well, listen, we're talking here about the sovereign grant. That's the publicly funded part of one of the monarchy's income streams. They have others, private ones, for example, but this is the publicly funded part of it. And the palace, not surprisingly, called the last year an historic and exceptional year. Why? Well, of course, this time last year we were celebrating the Platinum Jubilee of the late Queen, and then in September we were mourning her loss and having the huge funeral. Now, we found out from the report that the Platinum Jubilee cost the palace £700,000 and the funeral an extra £1.6 million. These are just the costs for the palace, by the way, not all those costs paid for by the government. And that's left it spending a lot more money than it had, effectively. As you just said, the £86.3 million wasn't enough to cover the costs, and they had to borrow £20 million from their reserves. But they've also been affected by things like a reduction in visitors post-pandemic. That was a useful stream of money from ticket sales. They've stalled on their diversity statistics. They've only got a 9.7% of their staff come from diverse backgrounds. And the King's ordered heating to be turned down across all the palaces. And therefore, if you're in a room that's occupied, you're allowed to have it at 19 degrees Celsius. If you're in a room that's unoccupied, it now has to be at 16 Celsius, and that's cut their emissions.
What have we learned about Harry and Meghan's ties with the UK?
Well, what we learned is they've cut them entirely. You remember Frogmore Cottage, where they used to live? That was their official UK residence that they themselves paid for to be renovated. They've now left. They've packed up and left for good. The palace won't tell us who is moving in next, and equally they won't tell us what's happening with Prince Andrew's property, which is Royal Lodge on Windsor as well. They say they're private matters, private leases, and won't comment on who's living where.
Chris, thank you very much. Thank you. Finally, fans and celebrity fans have sent well wishes to Madonna after the star's manager revealed she's been in intensive care. Her world tour has been postponed. She was treated for a serious bacterial infection. Here's our entertainment reporter, Rishi Davda.
Plans for Madonna's big party have been put on pause. The Queen of Pop was just weeks away from her 84-date celebration tour, which has been postponed because of issues with her health. Her long-term manager posted that on Saturday, Madonna developed a serious bacterial infection, which led to a several-day stay in the intensive care unit. Her health is improving, however she is still under medical care. A full recovery is expected.
So I've gathered you all here today because I want to do something different to start off rehearsal.
Madonna was deep in preparation for her 12th major tour when she fell ill. One doctor says that with serious bacterial infections, it's vital to get help as quickly as possible.
You can become unconscious and your blood pressure drops. And if you're not a healthy woman, and this just speaks to how healthy Madonna must be, often people die in that moment. But whoever came to her aid, whoever got her to the hospital quickly saved her life.
The upcoming shows were to mark 40 years of Madonna in music, beginning in Canada before coming to the UK later this year. Fans with tickets are disappointed it's been delayed.
I was absolutely gutted is the only way I can answer. Obviously, I then thought,
gosh, I hope she is okay. Because for her to cancel what, was touted to be the biggest concert ever, I think, of her career, I was gutted.
Madonna's manager has said they're working on rescheduling the tour so that she can rest, recover and give millions of fans the perfect performance. Rishi Davda, ITV News.
Join Mary for the latest at 6:30, but that's all from me. Bye-bye.